What's going on, everybody? Jared Sandler here with you, getting ready for episode 73 of the Just a Sec conversation with my pal, NBC's Pat Doney. Pat has a really cool story, how he arrived in the Metroplex and how he's worked and had success here in a major market. He's also got a son who's one of the biggest inspirations, for me at least, of people I've come across. And we talk with Pat about adopting a son who has major physical and intellectual challenges that he pushes to try and overcome every single day. It really is inspirational. Really enjoyed my conversation with Pat. Hope you do as well. As always, if you could subscribe, maybe like, or just comment below, or just take the link, copy, paste, share it with friends. I would really appreciate it. It goes a long way in helping support this project. Salute to Zach Rowe for producing this episode as he does all episodes. So here we go, episode 73 of the Just a Sec conversation with Pat Doney.
All right, Pat, the first thing I always like to ask people, and you can go in whatever direction you'd like, but what were you like growing up? What are some of the defining characteristics or things that stand out to you when you think back to your childhood?
Well, I loved sports. Surprise, surprise, right? You know, always playing sports year-round. Very active. My parents were involved in the small private Christian school that I went to school and church on the same campus. And so 6 days a week I was there. I played a lot of music, played a lot of sports, and it was the kind of place where they were like, hey, if you have the interest in learning how to do something and putting in a lot of time into doing it, you know, you'll have the opportunity to do that. So I played 3 sports in high school, and I played the drums and the guitar and the praise worship band there at the school and at the church, and was involved in student council quite a bit. So very active, not a lot of downtime. But, man, growing up in Southern California and Huntington Beach, the weather was great, about 360 days a year. So I spent a lot of time at the beach, too, in the mornings. And man, I had a great childhood overall. It really was a cool experience growing up.
All right, so I guess, first of all, what was it about sports? What drew you to sports then? Not necessarily what has drawn you to sports to keep that as a profession now, but back then, like, why sports? Were your parents really into sports, or was it just something that you were drawn to?
And my dad is a huge sports fan, especially high school football and baseball. And so we grew up going to baseball games a lot, but we also went to all of the school that I grew up going to, all of the football and basketball games. And I was actually a ball boy for the high school football team starting at like 4 years old, running out, getting the tee and getting the football, you know, from the officials, things like that, water boy all the way up through. So, for whatever reason, at a young age, it just clicked with me to, you know, really want to be a part of that. I loved football and I loved baseball especially. And, you know, and so it was just a huge part of my life with my dad growing up and my younger brother as well. And, you know, and then I started playing at a fairly young age, t-ball and flag football and basketball, all of these things, and had some success in some of it. You know, some of the other, you know, sometimes it took a little bit of time, you know, but, you know, when it's something that your whole family is into, you have the opportunity to be a part of it consistently. And then if you have a little bit of success in it too, I think it just makes natural sense that you'll kind of gravitate towards that. And so it just became a really big thing for me in my childhood growing up.
All right, now you mentioned Southern California, and I went to school out there. As you know, we've talked about USC a bunch, but there's, and not to like stereotype, but you don't have like the Southern California surfer bro disposition. And we probably both have several friends who do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like, I wouldn't look at you and be like Southern California, just like I don't think people would look at me and say Dallas, Texas. But
right.
So how, like, what are the most California things about you? I know you said you like the beach, but are you like, do you surf? Like, I don't know. Like, are you, is that like your heaven is to just go to a beach, like whenever you and the family go on vacation? But like, what's something like really Cali about you?
Yeah, no, I grew up surfing. I wasn't great because I, you know, was more committed to traditional sports, you know, but I did surf quite a bit with my friends growing up. I had an old pickup truck, and we used to throw surfboards in the back of it and head out and, you know, quite a bit in the summertime, surf a lot. So I do miss that a lot. As far as a Cali thing, a Southern California thing, you know, I love fish tacos. That's probably my favorite food on the planet is Rubio's Fish Tacos, which is a chain out in the West Coast. They have great Baja Mexican food, and so that's something I miss quite a bit. And it's, just like maybe not feeling as Southern Californian now, I would probably venture to guess that a little bit of that has worn off as I've lived other places around the country. I mean, I went to school in Virginia. I've lived 3 years in Fayetteville, Arkansas, then 3 years in Louisville, Kentucky, and now coming up on 8 years in Dallas. So, it's a part of who I am, and I miss the beach, and I miss Southern California in some aspects a lot. But I also think that you kind of take little bits and pieces of every place that you go, and it becomes a part of kind of who you are in your story. And so there are certain things for sure, like I love rainbow sandals and, bonfires at the beach are definitely probably my favorite thing of all time. But I don't get to do that quite a bit here in Dallas. So I've just kind of gotten used to a new way of life here. And we love it here. I think this is a great place to live. And people have, they've been incredible to my family. And we have some of the best friends we've ever had in our lives here in North Texas. So I couldn't be happier living here now.
All right. So let's see. I'm trying to think which path to go down first. All right. So you mentioned bouncing around, and that's very normal for, someone in this industry. You rattled off the places you've lived, and I've lived in Minnesota, Montana, Michigan, and before I got to come back home to DFW. When you think back to those stops, what are things that stand out to you, whether it's like from a professional growth, personal growth side of things, or just the life experiences of getting to live different parts of the country? What are the first things that kind of come to mind?
Well, I always say that one of the greatest things that happened to me was going to school back east, like on the East Coast in Virginia, away from my comfort zone there, because, it's an education in itself, just experiencing different culture, different people from different parts of the country. And then, dude, from your time living in California when you went to SC, I had never experienced having to, scrape ice off of a windshield before. I had never lived in a place where it consistently was below 60 degrees or above 90 degrees. And it's funny, but little things like that, like seasons, people take that for granted and they might think that it's paradise, and it really is great, weather-wise in California. I get it. But there is something cool about there being the change in the seasons, things like that. So from just a living in different places aspect, I think that's been great. But also, when you learn more about people and their backstory and about where they're from, I think that it just makes you a more well-rounded person. And so the fact that I've been able to live in Southern California, in Virginia, in Arkansas, right in the middle of SEC country where they care about SEC sports more than anything there in Fayetteville, then in Louisville, Kentucky, getting to experience the Kentucky Derby. I stood at the finish line 2 years in a row there. Louisville and Kentucky both won national championships in basketball while I was there. And college basketball there is like football in Dallas-Fort Worth. So it's everything there. Getting to experience these different things, and then now the football craze and passion that's here in Texas, man, it's cool, and it makes you kind of appreciate that we live in this giant country where everybody has just these different things that make each location special and different, but they really are special and different, and it's cool. And you make friends in each spot along the way, and everybody just brings a little bit of piece to your story as well.
I'm curious, from when you think to where you are now, or think of where you are now professionally, versus where you were when you left Liberty University. You mentioned going to college. What was the most challenging source or area for growth? What was something for me? I think it was just getting comfortable when the red light turned on to find my own voice as a broadcaster, whether it was for sports talk or play-by-play, and to not feel like I was constantly emulating others. What was that for you? What was the dangling carrot that took the longest to actually finally snatch?
Oh, there's no question that it's the comfort when you're live, right? Because anybody can look good and sound good on camera when you can do 75 takes, right? It makes sure every word is perfect. But it's getting to that spot where you just kind of feel comfortable being yourself, and you're even okay if you kind of mess up a word here or there because, well, it's just kind of part of, being in the moment and being live and being comfortable. I respect the people at the top so much. Guys a guy like Scott Van Pelt comes to mind. Who is more comfortable on camera than Scott Van Pelt? he is just so smooth and comfortable. And that's who, when like young college students come to me and they say, hey, what should I work on? I'm like, look at a guy like Scott. Look at a guy like Kirk Herbstreit. You know, look at a guy like Mike Tirico. These are all people who are super comfortable and smooth when they're live on the air, and they're just able to be themselves and not try to play the part of someone else. And it's hard to put your finger on exactly what that is, but I think anybody who watches someone on TV who is comfortable and smooth, they can say, okay, I feel that guy has something to him, or that girl has something to her about being that smooth on camera person in that moment, and they're okay being themselves. And that just brings a confidence to the broadcast that, again, that's something that the casual viewer can't put a finger on, but they can definitely feel it when it's not comfortable. They can definitely feel it when it feels really scripted, or when it feels tense and uncomfortable and the person's nervous. So that takes a long time, man. That's why when anybody asks me about how to get into broadcasting, and college students come to me and they say, hey, what should my journey look like? How can I get to Dallas? How can I get to network? That I always tell them, well, first of all, I cannot recommend highly enough going to live and work in smaller markets, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes when you're new at this, because it's hard, and you'd much rather do that in a smaller market than in Dallas, Fort Worth, or like you, when you're talking about on, you know, a national Major League Baseball broadcast potentially, where people around the world could be listening to a Rangers game. I think I'd much rather be doing that in, like you said, where you stopped in Minnesota or Michigan, or smaller markets along the way before you got to where you are now.
Pat, it's not just the world. We have aliens on other planets who are big Rangers fans, just so you know.
Hey, man. Hey, look, the Rangers, that's a worldwide industry right there, man. And you do a great job on the broadcast.
That I can't confirm that. I don't know if I agree with that, but we are a galactical team. So I'm curious, you know, one of the things I get asked a ton, I got asked way more before I had a role that wasn't like, that people weren't familiar with from afar. Like when I told people, I'm going to go live in Minnesota, I'm, you know, sports broadcaster. Oh, like you want to be on Sports Center. Like that was I probably got asked that in the first 5 years after high school and college more than any other question specific to my field. Now, my role and what I do, my skill set is totally different from that. Yours is more in that arena. Did you grow up watching Sports Center, wanting to be a Sports Center anchor like Stuart Scott? You mentioned Scott Van Pelt, who's, you know, now doing his own sort of Sports Center type thing, but you know, was in that role before. Dan Patrick, like some of these like Sports Center anchor legends that were so big when you and I were growing up. Was that like an inspiration for you at all?
I had two that stood out from that aspect. NFL Primetime with Berman and Tom Jackson. I mean, that was must-watch TV every Sunday night in our house. And then College Game Day on Saturday mornings with Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit, Lee Corso. I mean, that was the dream in some aspects. And in another aspect, I actually wanted to do what you do right now. I wanted to be a radio Major League Baseball play-by-play broadcaster. That was the dream for a while. But what happens is, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier, living in different things, different experiences shape your journey. So after my freshman year of college, I applied for about 70 internships in minor league baseball teams, local TV stations, national, ESPN, Sports Illustrated, anywhere that I had a place where I felt comfortable that there was a family member within about 30 miles of the place that would let me sleep on their couch for the summer, I applied for it. And I only heard back from two places. It was the local CBS affiliate in Nashville, Tennessee, and the local ABC affiliate, KABC, in Los Angeles. So I had a ton of small town TV stations tell me I was not qualified to be an intern in places like, for example, I had family in Greenville, South Carolina. And they were like, no, man, I'm sorry, you're not qualified for this. But for some reason, Stan Radford, I still remember the guy, he's still there at KABC and ABC Sports in Los Angeles, saw something in my resume and said, we're going to give you a chance. I don't know what that was and why he did it, but it changed my life because I ended up interning 2 summers in a row at KABC and became really close friends with the weekend sports anchor who is still there, Kurt Sandoval, who is my mentor and one of my best friends just in life in general now. He taught me how to tell stories. He made me fall in love with being a storyteller. He worked a lot with me on trying to get more comfortable on camera. It didn't necessarily work for a long time, but eventually I think it got there to an extent. And that changed my life. That made me really want to pursue local sports as a storyteller on TV. And I had some amazing experiences with that internship there. Things like my first ever internship I ever did was they sent me to Dodger Stadium, and I did a one-on-one with Jimmy Kimmel. I was 19 years old. I had never interviewed anyone in my life. And my first interview was with Jimmy Kimmel on the field at Dodger Stadium for ABC in LA. I mean, it was terrible. He was awesome. But these are the kind of things where, like, you experience something like that, and I think it changes your dreams sometimes. It can be like, okay, I think this is actually what I want to do. So that's where things really started to take shape.
All right, Pat, I got to ask you about something that is so identifiable with you, and you get made fun of for this, you get lauded for this, whether you're given a hard time about it or not. I think that, people are truly in admiration of your positive disposition. I mean, you've never had a bad day. I've never seen you sulk. I'm sure you're married with 2 kids, and we're going to get into the family side of things in a little bit, but I think anyone who's married with kids, like, their stresses, their things that go on, things out of your control, you would never know. I mean, I've said this to your face off air, but I want to make sure people listening know how it feels. I mean, I love you for a lot of reasons. You're one of my favorite people in this industry, but, like, your attitude is unrivaled. I legitimately don't know anyone, maybe like Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Fred Rogers, like, I guess maybe has, like, a similar disposition. At least that's how it came off. But, like, where does that come from? Like, are your parents, I know, like, your faith is a big part of what who you are and how you go about your life. But, like, I know people who are of similar levels of faith who aren't this positive. So I know that can't be the only reason. So where does this all come from?
Well, first of all, thank you. That was very nice of you to say. Mr. Rogers is much more positive than me, so we're not going to put me in that category there. And my wife can confirm this if we need to get her on later at some point. But my faith plays a huge role in it for sure. The fact that Jared, we get one life, man. We get one shot at this thing, and it's just, I don't know, something clicked early on in my life where it just kind of hit square right between the eyes, where it was like, man, you get one shot at this thing. Why would you ever want to spend this precious time sulking or down or struggling with and focusing on the things that are negative? So, my faith plays a huge role in this. I'm a devout Christian, and I'm striving to try and be like Jesus every single day. Be somebody who shines positivity and hope consistently. So from a personal standpoint, it comes from that. It comes from, a lot of friends that I have who are also, the kind of people who, we're trying to be like the kind of people that we're trying to be, right? I mean, like, everybody is going to naturally tend to move towards energy and positivity. And really it goes back to the internship at KABC. There was a moment that stood out to me too, where my mentor, Kurt, pointed out one of their meteorologists there, and he was like, everybody loves that guy. You want to know why everybody loves that guy? I was like, why? He goes, because the guy just clearly loves his job and just brings so much infectious energy and positivity to the broadcast and to the newsroom and all of that. It was like, everybody loves that guy. Be that guy on air. And I was like, well, I'm kind of already that guy in person. Maybe I should try and make this work on TV too, and be that same person and be myself. And it's just kind of turned into, who I am, all the way around, which, as I said earlier, it makes things a lot easier if you can be yourself when you're on TV. But, sometimes I think these things are a little bit natural too. We're all blessed with things that are easier and more difficult. And so, being a natural optimist has always been something that comes a little easier to me than for some others. But at the same time, it's not always that way, Jared. I can assure you there are some days where it's a little doom and gloom, where we have a little bit of down days from time to time.
All right. So let me ask you, just because I've never been around you to experience you deal with this sort of thing, like, how do you process the moments that other people might more outwardly demonstrate their stress or their frustration, like how do you process that? How do you deal, whether it's personally or professionally? What are the things that you do or the ways you go about overcoming these things?
Well, first and foremost, you try to think big picture. I mean, at least that's what I do. I try to think when something is happening in the moment that is worthy of having me potentially be a little down in this moment, is it something that I'm going to look back 5 years from now and think, well, I'm really glad that I spent a lot of time being down in the dumps about that? Trying to have perspective in the big picture. The second thing is, frankly, based off of what you were saying earlier, I know that now at this point, people kind of look to me to be somebody who's a little, more optimistic and is kind of high energy and brings that mentality to a situation. And so, I'm trying to be a leader at the same time as well. I'm trying to lead everybody has different ways of being a leader and being someone who is about positive change in different ways or making an impact on other people. And if me being able to stand strong and be firm and have a steady hand, even through a storm, even through a difficult circumstance, can be motivating to someone else to have a similar approach and to try to get through a difficult circumstance, well, that's leadership. And that's something that I pride myself in as well. So, it's not always easy. And we're all going to go through difficult, challenging things. I've been through plenty of challenging things in my life, but at the same time, God has blessed me tremendously too. I mean, I have been able to do some amazing things professionally. I have an amazing wife, kids, family, friends. I mean, job, all of these things have all worked out in so many different ways that, yeah, things have been challenging in some aspects. But like I said, man, we have one shot at this thing in life. Why would I focus on those when there have been so many incredible things that God has blessed me with? I'd much rather spend my time focusing and being locked in on that.
Okay, so and that's awesome to hear. It really, I people who listen to the fan hear people call you Positive Pat, and maybe they just don't realize the full extent of it. You really are. It's in all areas. I mean, you probably could take a situation where there are nothing but gray clouds above, and it's you're instilling some level of confidence or belief that everything's going to be okay. And I think part of that's your passion. I don't know that you really do stuff that does not have some degree of passion. And one of those things is high school football. And in our industry, I think the goal is to cover sports at the highest level, or maybe some people, they're really just college football junkies, and that's, they prefer that over the NFL game. But usually it goes beyond the high school level, and you cover the Cowboys, the Stars, the Mavericks, the Rangers, the college athletics at a high level, whether it's UT or if OU's in a big. I mean, you're involved in all of that. So it's not like high school football is the stop for you in terms of your scope of coverage, but you embrace the heck out of this and love the heck out of this. And I guess you mentioned it earlier. You grew up so tied to high school football programs as a ball boy and the T runner and all that stuff. But I don't know, is that where it stems from? Why is this so much of a passion for you?
Yeah, that's definitely where it started, was growing up with it being a passion. When I talk to my dad about sports back home, one of the main things that we talk about is high school football in Southern California, Mater Dei, St. John Bosco, Orange Lutheran, these other powerhouse programs, Servite out in Southern California, because he follows it very closely. And so I did growing up as well. And, my high school would play games on Saturday nights because we were a private school, and that's a pretty common thing in Southern California. And so my dad and I would all the time, we would go to a different high school football game on a Friday night that involved two good teams that we have no ties to the school whatsoever. So that definitely was a part of my childhood. One of the reasons I love my job at NBC5 so much in Dallas is because I'm able to do both of those things. You're right. Most people, grow up, if they're in this industry, wanting to cover things at the highest level. Well, I mean, it's hard to beat getting to cover about 14 to 16, depending on the year, Dallas Cowboys football games a year, home and away. Going to training camp in Oxnard for a couple of weeks most years. I know this year they're at the Star. Going to Rangers spring training for a week or two every year. Getting a chance to cover the Mavericks and the Stars, all of that. I get to do all of those things, but then I also get to still follow that high school football passion that I've had for a long time And really, man, I mean, it matters in the community that we live in. People, they really they relate to their home community high school football team. And I know that just because when we go out to a different game for NBC5 for our big game Friday game of the week, which begins tonight. I know I'm dating this and I apologize, but like I'm on my way right now to our first high school football game of the year. And it's the community is going to be rallying around the teams that are there because they identify with that team. And it's a big part of the community here in North Texas. So I've always loved it. I love that I get to still do it here, but I also love that I get to have the other aspects too and cover things like the Cowboys, Ranger Stars, Mavericks, TCU, SMU, FC Dallas, all of the other things that are going on here in North Texas.
All right, Pat. I want to ask you, we're going to get into family in a second, but I want to ask you about Liberty. You went to Liberty University, and we had a conversation 6 months ago, a year, I don't know, whenever it was. And you know, like we talked about, you're a very passionate person, but you had grown frustrated with maybe the direction of Liberty, and Liberty's been in the news recently with Jerry Falwell, and you know, I'm sure that's, you know, not something that you're waving the flag for by any means. But I'm just curious from a general sense, because I know you love USC as well from your Southern California ties, and I am so passionate about my alma mater, USC, but USC by no means has gone down the right path with, you know, things, whether it's sports related or non-sports related. You know, it seems like any issue with a college, it's like USC's probably involved somehow. And that's always been tough for me to reconcile because it doesn't change the love I have for USC. It's like I'm a dad who's just like disappointed in his son, but like I still love my son. And I guess I'm curious, like, how have you dealt with that with your alma mater and like the ways that you approach the passion, the pride that you have or had in going to Liberty? And, you know, Liberty's a unique school, and, you know, the way it's, you know, the way it goes about business, you know, it's usually people who go to Liberty, I think, probably have a lot of pride. And, you know, hey, I went to Liberty. Like, that was a choice I made. And I don't know. I'm rambling here, but how have you been able to process a lot of this?
Well, I mean, it's been hard to process the situation, Jared, just to be frank. I mean, the whole thing has been very challenging because, as we said earlier, I mean, I'm very passionate about my faith. I'm very passionate about trying to be someone who represents who my faith represents, right? And that's Jesus. You know, I'm trying my best to be a representative of that to my friends, to complete strangers, to people who are kind to me, to people who are rude to me. And I fail daily in this. And that's one of the reasons that I went to Liberty. At the time, you know, I went and I felt as if the university really was all about trying to train people to come to school there and represent our faith while also getting a quality education to prepare people to go and work in the public sector in different ways, not just in ministry. It's the biggest Christian school in America. And, you know, in recent years, it definitely has gotten more tense. It definitely has gotten more political. It has gone away sometimes from feeling like faith first. And that's sometimes what's been a little bit challenging with that circumstance. You know, as far as the specifics of what's happened with Jerry Falwell Jr., you know, I don't know what happened there. And you know, frankly, I don't feel super comfortable speaking to it just because there's so much unknown, and it's an embarrassing situation for a place that, you know, meant a lot to me. I met my wife there. I have some great friends who went there. There are great people at Liberty. But obviously what happened there in that circumstance doesn't represent what the university represents. And so, you know, I hope that it gets back to a place that can have a reputation and a mentality there on campus. And in some aspects it still has, even through these challenging times. But I want it to be a place where people go and they say, you know what, first and foremost, we're training people to be believers and follow in our faith. And number one in following in our faith is putting other people's souls ahead of caring about differences of opinion and political disagreements and things like that. And so that's been the most challenging thing, is that sometimes I think that's been lost in the main core values and message over the last few years. And that makes it challenging because, like you said, with USC, when they fall into and they have something that happens that you don't necessarily want to be associated with, but still you have so many great memories there and so many great friends, from your time there, and it helped you in so many different ways, it's hard to kind of separate one from the other, right? I mean, it's like you don't know totally how to react to it. So I'm hoping that it can kind of get back to what it was, I feel like, when I was there. And, we'll kind of see what it goes like in the future here in the next few years. But that's the reason that I went there. And like I said, I had many great experiences there. They helped me tremendously in my career. I met my wife the first day of our sophomore year, and I'm super thankful for that. And I still have a lot of incredible friends from there too. But it's definitely a challenging circumstance right now.
And I appreciate you sharing on that. I mean, I don't want to say USC hasn't had something to that degree because unfortunately USC's had professors and heads of departments that have done things that are despicable. And then, they've had their own, athletically, they've had their issues. And then, you got the Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman and the bribery. I mean, it's just and I always wonder, I mean, it's funny. I'm wearing a USC shirt now as I speak to you, and I have so much pride in USC. But they've had their things where it's like I don't align, I don't agree, this is not the school. I don't want to wave the flag of the school for these reasons, but I've always been conflicted with that.
Well, and I will say one other thing about it, Jared, too, that makes it a little different is that when you're a faith-based school, okay, and you're a school that is on it, I mean, the Bible specifically calls, Christians to be a light on a hill, right? Salt of the earth, salt of the world type thing, to stand out, to be different. You're going to be held to a different standard. I mean, that's just all there is to it. And when there are mistakes that are made, it's going to create more challenging circumstances in that situation, because I have fully accepted that because I profess my faith and I am willing to say what I say about things, that I'm going to be held to a different standard sometimes. And so that's what sometimes can make it a little bit, more challenging and difficult there too. But yeah, it's definitely a tough circumstance right now.
All right, Pat, you have a beautiful daughter, Barlow, and a son, Hudson. And Hudson was adopted, and he's got cerebral palsy, and you really share some of the challenges and really the achievements, the milestones of his life on social media, and it's oftentimes the best thing on social media that day. And recently, going to kindergarten with his, the assistance with the chair and the ability to communicate through technology and some of the amazing elements of science and whatnot. But the reality is Hudson is not, he's probably never going to be able to do a lot of the things that he won't be able to do this, perhaps, and have a conversation, the way we're doing it. And he's overcome. I mean, how tough this kid is incredible. So I guess, first of all, what led to, if you don't mind me asking, adopting Hudson? And I think so many parents probably, when they think of adopting a kid, they think of adopting a kid with health who doesn't have some of the challenges that Hudson has. Why was that the right decision for you and your wonderful wife, Shalina? Why Hudson, and what went into that decision?
Well, early on in our time dating, Shalina told me that she felt that God was calling her to adopt someday, that she felt like her dad is a pastor. My father-in-law is a pastor in Virginia Beach. And there was a family in their church who had adopted a little girl from China when she was very young. And Shalina had just kind of seen how it transformed the little girl's life, obviously, going from an orphanage in China to living with a family in the United States, embracing her as their own. But also it changed the family in a dramatic way. I mean, it completely shapes and changes your worldview about the fact that, hey, we can embrace other people. And it's not just blood. It's also, hey, let's find a way to try and do for the least of these, right? And so, I never thought about it. I started looking into it. And, the number of orphans in the United States who are available to be adopted and who are waiting for a family is heartbreaking. And so she and I agreed that we would do it someday. So we got married. We had a bunch of student loan debt we had to pay off. We got that all done. We had our first daughter, our first child, Barlow, as you mentioned. And then we said, it's go time. It's time to adopt. And so we went through the process, and it took us a little less than a year to be selected. And we got the phone call that our son had been born. And so we drove there that day. He had been born the night before. We met him, stayed with him for a few days in the hospital, and brought him home. And, he 6 months later officially was our son. And so it was amazing. Like, everything was going great. We couldn't believe that, how awesome he was, that it took literally under a year to have it happen is unheard of. Everything was coming together great. And then about 2 or 3 months after the adoption was finalized, he started to not progress in different things. He started to not be able to lift his head up or roll over or crawl. And his arms and hands kept fisting, a lot up high up by his chin, And so we started doing the Google searches and, going to WebMD and typing in these things. And, of course, that's usually a terrible idea because it's telling you the worst-case scenario almost every single time. And it just kept coming back with these were signs of cerebral palsy. And we were like, no way, no chance. We called this pediatrician. She was like, I don't think that's it. But if you want to go and meet with a pediatric neurologist, we can arrange for that to happen. And she can kind of do a quick check over just to make sure that's not what it is. And so a few weeks later, we went and met with the pediatric neurologist. And she did a few pokes and prods on the changing table there and moved his arms and legs a little bit. And, dude, within 10 minutes, she sat us down and she said, he has CP. And we were just like, how, what? How is that possible? How do you know? And she was like, well, we'll do a full scan of his brain here in a week or two, a CAT scan. But I'm positive right now with the different things that he's doing right now, these are clear-cut signs that he has cerebral palsy. And so clearly, that was one of the hardest days of our life hearing that. We had a lot of questions, frankly, for God, about why this had happened to us, and less selfishly, why this was happening to our boy, a kid who had done nothing wrong, who had already had to go through what's going to be emotionally challenging, and it is for most people who are adopted, trying to find out why they had been chosen to be adopted and everything that happens with that. And it's been a journey, man. We've had a lot of challenging things, but as you mentioned, we've had a lot of successes too. And Hudson is inspiring so many people who have never even met him before through social media, through taking steps when he was never supposed to be able to walk, through being able to communicate and read as a 4-year-old and letting us and communicating with us on a device that was designed by Microsoft for Steve Gleason, the ALS patient from former New Orleans Saints player. That same technology is what Hudson's using. He started using it when he was 2 years old. And everybody around him, all of the specialists were like, this is unheard of. We have never seen a kid this young do this. And he's doing all of this, and he's missing a part of his brain. So I always joke around. I'm like, can you imagine this guy had his whole brain? Like how, what he would be doing and the way he would be changing the world. So he is going to a regular kindergarten class right now with an aide. He's able to, like I said, to read, to communicate. He has a chair that he can drive with his head. He doesn't do that super well yet, but we're going to get there. And he has incredible motion right now compared to what we thought was going to happen with his left hand. And he's going to get to the point where he can drive his chair using his left hand. So challenging to say the least, but, man, the mountains put in front of us, he just keeps knocking them down. And he keeps doing things that I think most experts and specialists would have told us were never possible when we got the diagnosis, when we saw the CAT scan originally. And here we are now, and he just turned, today's his 5th birthday. So he's 5 years old today. And man, he's incredibly inspiring. He inspires me every single day as well. And you know what? Going full circle, he's probably a big reason why I am so positive and optimistic about the world, because if he's positive and optimistic through what he's going through on a day-to-day basis, how the heck can I not be positive going through small challenges compared to what he has to go through on a day-to-day basis?
And I appreciate you sharing that. And I think one of the reasons why, I think you probably have to be without a heart to not be moved in some way by Hudson's story. But, as you know, I have a charity that serves kids with physical and cognitive disabilities, and hopefully being able to provide opportunities, much like, what you and your wife have done for HUD. And one of the things I learned very quickly, and I think I'd learned this before I started the charity, I think it's one reason why I wanted to do it, is that, I guess it's geared to serve others, but like at the end of the day, like I think I'm just as impacted by these kids as hopefully they're impacted by the work we do, like how inspiring they are and, just their disposition and their attitudes. And I guess I'm curious, like how do you think parenting, and I don't mean to take anything away from Barlow. She's a sweetheart and her guitar skills are off the chain and she's so cute. And I'm sure that this is one of the things you have to balance. It's not like forgetting about her because so much attention needs to go to Hudson. But how do you think that's influenced you personally and professionally, just parenting Hudson and the way that's just impacted you?
Well, number one, I think that we have embraced a philosophy in our family that we don't treat him differently, that we treat him the same, and that we're not one of these families who it's like, that if you looked at our family, if you looked at our Facebook pages or like on social media, or if you met us, we wouldn't like introduce ourselves as like a cerebral palsy family, right? I mean, like we have decided that we are going to make the most of this circumstance and that he's going to knock down as many of these challenges and obstacles in his way as possible. And so that's number one, is that we go into it. Hudson's friends, he goes to school and he has a ton of friends at church and school and just other friends that we interact, and most of them don't have special needs. I mean, they're regular kindergartners or first graders or second graders, and they all love Hudson because he's funny and he's super positive and like he cracks jokes on his device and like he has the most infectious laugh ever, when like he thinks something is hilarious, and like there's just all these different things. So number one, I think we have really gone out of our way to make sure that we don't treat him differently unless it's the things that are out of our control, right? The things that just come physically, there are some limitations that he has. And then as far as, how it's impacted me and our family, professionally, and my wife and our marriage and all that, I think when you go through tough times and you go through challenges, it really, people have a choice in those moments to decide whether or not they're going to kind of lean in to the family, or if they're going to kind of break apart and kind of have a difficult time and separate and have, it's going to break you apart and you're going to struggle. And for whatever reason, it's come fairly naturally for Shalina and me, and Barlow, as you mentioned, is incredible. I mean, man, she is such a good big sister to him. She already knows how to do a bunch of his medicines and feeding tube and all of this stuff. And she's 7. It's unbelievable how caring she is. But for all of us, I think it's made us really tight. We are really close. We really lean into the challenges together. And we have tried to do the best we can to make it as normal as we possibly can, which is why we cared so much about him going to a regular kindergarten class and a regular school with the aide. We didn't want him to go to a different program. And different families have different needs and different desires for their children. But I'm telling you, in our circumstance, we want to give our son the best possible chance to one day make a major impact on the world and be as independent as possible. And man, I feel really like weird name dropping this right now, but I'm going to go ahead and name drop somebody right now for you, Jared. Okay. So I was at a Mavs game getting ready to do a live shot, and Mark Cuban was shooting baskets before the game like he does before, it happens from time to time. And I ended up striking up a conversation with him, and we started talking about Hudson. And Mark was one of the most encouraging people in our little 20-minute conversation that we had about voice technology, things like Alexa, things like the technology that's there to be able to do things voice activated, and what that's going to look like for Hudson down the road. And it was an amazingly encouraging conversation about if he is able to use his device to have a voice, his communication device called a Tobii Dynavox, he will someday be able to tell an Alexa a voice command system of some type to drive him to a certain place in a house, to put him into the car and drive him to a place like a store, things like that. These are all in the near future for this technology, and it opened our eyes as to what the potential is for him if he can just master this device, which he's doing right now, which has also encouraged us to try to make him as normal as we possibly can, using normal in the best sense of the word there. But we want him to fit in, and we want him to feel like a regular 5-year-old as much as we possibly can. He has his challenges, but he's fully mentally there, man, and he's really, really smart. I mean, it's unreal. His ability, his memory is incredible. And like I said, he's already reading and reads back to us. We hold up the book, and he says the word on the device that is on the book. And he would go through go, dog, go, and 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, all of these. He goes through all of that on his device.
There you go, episode 73 with Pat Doney. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I did. And gosh, I mean, if you don't follow Pat on Instagram, you should. There's just good content in general, but if for no other reason, if you want a smile on your face regularly, Pat posts updates, experiences he shares with his son Hudson. It really is special. He's simply at Pat Doney on Instagram, and his son's journey has really inspired me, and I know many others. All right, that's going to do it for us here with this episode. Be on the lookout. We've got more coming your way, including a conversation with Josh Lewin, as well as the head coach of the UT Arlington men's basketball team, former Texas Longhorn Final Four starting player Chris Ogden, and much more. Stay safe. Be healthy. We'll talk to you soon.